The conference room was glass, steel, and controlled silence. It held the city like a reflection trapped on purpose, clean lines, polished surfaces, and a kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful so much as disciplined. Light from the skyline filtered through the windows and broke into pale angles across the table, catching the edges of documents and the chrome of water pitchers. Even the air felt arranged, cool, filtered, unwilling to carry anything messy. Avery Caldwell stood at the head of the table with a thin folder in her hands and absolute command of the air around her. She wasn't packing, she wasn't leaning, she wasn't dramatic. Her posture was still, balanced, and unforced, shoulders squared without tension, chin level, gaze steady. The kind of composure that didn't need theatrics to be convincing because it was built from repetition, from rooms like this over and over, until the room itself learned to respond. She was precise. Across from her, opposing counsel adjusted his cufflinks and finished a statement that sounded confident but carried a flaw she had already cataloged. His voice had the comfortable cadence of someone used to speaking last, used to framing the narrative. His cufflinks flashed briefly when he gestured, and the pages in front of him were arranged as if arrangement alone could create certainty. Avery watched him without impatience, without interruption. Her expression didn't change, but her attention was active, tracking phrasing, noticing where he leaned on assumption, where he skipped over a clause he didn't want to touch. She let him finish. She always let them finish. Then she responded, calmly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She simply corrected the interpretation of liability with surgical clarity, cited precedent without glancing at her notes, and reframed the exposure in a way that made the client on the other side slowly sit back in his chair. Her words were measured, clean, controlled sentences that landed and stayed. She named the section. She placed the date. She referenced the outcome. She didn't embellish. She didn't plead. She didn't rush. Each point was a step that made the next step inevitable. There was a moment, quiet but unmistakable, when the balance shifted. She saw it. Opposing counsel saw it. He began flipping pages he hadn't intended to need. The sound of paper turning in a room like this was loud, small, sharp, and revealing. He kept his face neutral, but his hands moved faster. His confidence didn't vanish, but it recalibrated. It had to. Avery closed her folder. The soft thud of it meeting the table was gentle and final. "Unless you'd prefer we take this to hearing," she said evenly. Silence. It wasn't awkward silence. It was the silence of calculation, everyone in the room doing the same math at once. The client across the way shifted again, shoulders dropping, eyes narrowing. Opposing counsel's jaw flexed once, then stilled. The other side conceded. Not dramatically, not graciously, just conceding. Meeting adjourned. Chairs slid back, papers were gathered. A pen rolled slightly and was caught. A laptop snapped shut. Her client gave her a look that mixed relief and awe. She nodded once in acknowledgement, already thinking 3 steps ahead. The door shut behind the last person. The sound didn't echo. It simply ended the moment the way a period ends a sentence. Her assistant stepped in immediately. "Avery." "Yes." "There's been a call." She didn't tense. She didn't sigh. She didn't look toward the door as if expecting someone else to handle it. "From your grandfather's neighbor." A single pause. It was barely visible. A fraction of a second where her focus didn't waver, but something inside her shifted into a different register. "He passed early this morning." There was no collapse, no gasp, just stillness. In rooms like this, people expected a reaction they could read. Avery gave them none. Her breathing remained even. Her face remained composed, but the air around her felt subtly altered, as if a thread holding everything taut had been cut and replaced with something heavier. Avery nodded once. "Reschedule the 2 o'clock. Push the closing to tomorrow. Have Jonathan take the 4:30. Yes. And send flowers, Avery added after a beat. White, keep it simple. Yes. The assistant hesitated. Do you need? No, Avery said gently but firmly. That's all. The assistant left. Avery stood alone in the glass conference room for exactly 3 seconds. 3 measured breaths, 3 heartbeats, 3 seconds of private recalibration. Then she gathered her folder and walked back to her office. Inside, the city stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, towers lit in early evening glow, traffic threading between them like illuminated veins. The sky was the color of cooling steel, and the buildings reflected one another until everything looked endless and impersonal. Her desk was immaculate, files stacked, calendar precise, her name etched on frosted glass beside the door. She picked up her phone. Full bars, messages stacking. A dozen small demands waiting to be handled. She placed it down, opened her calendar, moved appointments with efficient clicks, booked a flight, canceled it, closed the screen. She would drive. Movement was cleaner than waiting. She packed in under 20 minutes. Laptop, legal pad, 1 structured suitcase, no excess. She didn't wander the office. She didn't take a last look. She didn't pause at the awards on the wall or the framed commendations that proved she belonged here. Before leaving, she paused at her desk and opened the top drawer. Inside was a fountain pen in a small leather case. Old, heavy, not corporate, not sleek. The leather had softened at the edges with years of handling. The pen itself was cool and solid, the kind of tool built to last rather than impress. Her grandfather had mailed it to her years ago with a handwritten card. She unfolded the card now. Use this pen to build something useful. The handwriting was steady and firm, the letters pressed into the paper like he meant them to hold. She read it once, then again. Avery folded the card carefully and slid it back into the case. No tears, no drama, just recognition. She turned off the lights, closed the office door. The latch clicked small, precise, final. Headlights cut through the dark highway hours later. No lingering shot of the skyline, just motion. Avery drove her old car west into thinning lights. The car's interior held the faint scent of worn leather and a hint of coffee that had soaked into the upholstery over years. The steering wheel had a familiar texture under her hands, slightly smoothed where her palms had rested through long commutes. The engine hummed steadily, a low vibration that felt grounded compared to the sterile silence of the office. Barbara sat beside her, shoes kicked off. One leg tucked beneath her. The radio hummed low static neither of them truly heard. The dashboard glow washed her face in muted amber, softening the sharpness of night. You didn't have to wrap the meeting before leaving, Barbara said quietly. I did, Avery replied. You always do. Avery didn't argue. The city fell away behind them. Industrial sprawl gave way to open land. Streetlights grew farther apart, then disappeared entirely. The dark outside the windows deepened until it felt like driving through an unlit ocean. Occasionally, a distant farmhouse light flickered in the distance, solitary and warm. Her phone signal flickered. 1 bar. None. Gone. Barbara glanced at her own screen. No service. 10 miles past the quarry, Avery said automatically. The words came out like muscle memory, information filed and kept, unforgotten. Barbara looked at her. You still know exactly where it drops. Avery kept her eyes on the road. The beam of the headlights swept across bare branches and roadside weeds bent by wind. I grew up here. Fact. Silence settled again. Not uncomfortable, not forced, Just the kind of quiet that happens when there's nothing useful left to say and everything meaningful is still too close to speak. The ranch sign appeared in the headlights. Caldwell Ranch. Weathered. Unchanged. The lettering had faded at the edges. The wood grain stood raised from seasons of sun and rain. But it was unmistakable, a marker that didn't ask permission to matter. Avery didn't slow. She drove through the gate. Gravel crunched beneath the tires, sharp and loud after miles of asphalt. The drive stretched ahead, bordered by fence lines that cut through the dark. The barn rose as a shadowed shape against the sky, larger than memory and exactly the same. Wind moved across open pasture with nothing to stop it. The funeral was small-town quiet, the kind of quiet that felt crowded. The chapel smelled faintly of lilies and old wood, a sweetness layered over decades of polished pews and worn hymnals. People looked at her when she walked in sympathy, curiosity, quiet evaluation. Avery signed the guest book in neat, controlled handwriting. The ink flowed evenly, her letters consistent, the pen strokes calm. Barbara stayed slightly behind her, a steady presence, close enough to feel like support without making a scene. And then Avery saw him. Daniel Hart stood near the hallway outside the chapel. Work-built shoulders beneath a dark coat, hair slightly longer than a city man, but not careless, a jaw that looked like it held decisions without announcing them. His posture was still grounded, as if he belonged to the building in a way that couldn't be borrowed. His hands rested loosely, not fidgeting, not performing grief, just present. He wasn't wearing a suit. He didn't need to. Their eyes met. Something old flickered and steadied. Not romance, not fantasy, recognition. "Avery," he said. "Daniel, you made it." "Of course I did." He held her gaze a moment longer than courtesy required, then stepped aside so she could pass. Inside, the pastor spoke of legacy and land, of a man who believed in staying when things were hard, of quiet labor that didn't ask for applause. The words drifted through the chapel like breath on cold glass, soft, temporary, but carrying weight. When the ranch was mentioned, attention shifted subtly. Toward Avery, toward Daniel. What happens now? The question lingered in the air. It didn't need to be voiced. It lived in the way someone's eyes paused on Avery's coat a fraction too long, in the way a whisper died when she turned her head. The will reading took place in the attorney's modest office after the burial. Framed certificates, a desk worn at the edges, a calendar turned to the wrong month. The air smelled like paper and ink and old carpet warmed by a small space heater. Avery sat upright, hands loosely folded. Her posture was composed, not defensive. Her face stayed neutral, but her attention was sharp. Daniel stood near the wall, not leaning. He held himself the way he always had, contained, steady, as though movement should be earned. The attorney cleared his throat. "To my granddaughter, Avery Caldwell, and to Daniel Hart." Avery lifted her chin slightly. "The Caldwell Ranch is left in equal shares." A murmur moved through the room, small, involuntary, quickly subdued. "And with one condition." The air tightened. Not because the words were loud, because everyone recognized what conditions did. Both heirs must reside continuously in the main house on the Caldwell Ranch for a period of 2 full years from the date of this will's execution. Residency must be uninterrupted. Barbara's head turned toward Avery. Avery did not look at her. During this period, all major operational decisions must be made jointly. Neither party may sell, transfer, restructure, lease, or materially alter ranch assets without written agreement from the other. The lawyer's voice was practiced, careful. The language was clean, binding, indifferent to anyone's feelings. A beat, then the final line. Failure to fulfill residency requirements will result in the immediate forfeiture of that heir's ownership share to the remaining party. Silence, not a sale, not a payout. Forfeiture, 2 years, continuous, uninterrupted, in the same house. With Daniel, the words stacked, one on top of the other, until they formed something solid and unavoidable. Avery spoke before the room fully processed it. "I'll comply." The attorney blinked. Daniel turned slightly toward her. "Okay," he asked quietly. "Not challenge. Calibration." His voice was controlled, but the question carried weight. It wasn't about the clause. It was about her, whether she meant what she said. "It's binding," Avery said. "Fighting it wastes time." Daniel studied her face for a long moment. His eyes didn't roam. They measured. They searched for cracks, hesitation, performance, the kind of quick bravado that vanished when things got real. Then nodded once. Outside, wind moved through bare branches. Inside, something irreversible had begun. The house felt different once the lawyer left, and the town quieted. It no longer felt like a place of mourning. It felt like a contract. Avery stood in the kitchen the next morning with her sleeves rolled and her hair pulled back in a practical knot. The cabinet still held her grandfather's dishes. The coffee tin was exactly where it had always been. Daniel entered from outside, boots heavy with frost, breath visible in the early air. "You're up," he said. "Cattle don't sleep in," she replied. His mouth almost twitched. Almost. He crossed to the sink, washed his hands, dried them on a towel that had seen decades of work. She poured coffee into 2 mugs without asking. Set one near him. He noticed, didn't comment. They drank in quiet that wasn't hostile, just unfamiliar. The refrigerator hummed softly in the corner. The old wall clock ticked. "You'll want to see the books," Daniel said finally. "I already do." He studied her a second, then nodded toward the small office off the kitchen. The ranch ledger sat on the desk, thick, worn at the edges, pages handwritten in careful script. Daniel didn't hover. He stood in the doorway while she opened it. Her eyes moved quickly. Feed costs, veterinary invoices, loan balance, equipment repairs. She didn't flinch. "How far behind are we?" she asked. 30 days on the operating note, he said. "And the balloon?" 6 months. She nodded once. No gasp. No dramatics. "All right," she said quietly. That word carried weight. Not panic. Plan. Later that afternoon, she reached for the truck keys hanging by the back door. They weren't there. Daniel stepped in from outside, keys in his hand. "You headed somewhere?" he asked. "Yes. With my truck. It's a ranch vehicle. It's registered to me." A small beat. "I need to go into town," she said evenly. "Feed quotes, hardware, groceries." "I can take you." "I don't need to be taken." There it was. The first spark. Not shouting. Not disrespect. Just territory shifting. Daniel held her gaze for a long moment. Then he handed her the keys. "Fuel's low. I'll fill it. Receipt goes in the ledger." Obviously. She walked out without hesitation. He watched her drive away, smoothly, confidently, like she hadn't spent years behind a city steering wheel instead of gravel roads. He wasn't unsettled. He was irritated. Not because she was incapable, because now he had to share. Town hadn't changed. The hardware store still smelled like oil and wood dust. The feed supplier still operated out of the same warehouse. But Avery moved differently now. She didn't smile politely and accept the first number. She asked for itemized cost breakdowns. She requested bulk discounts. She compared delivery schedules. She got 3 quotes. When she returned, the truck bed was organized, feed sample bags stacked, hardware bundled, paperwork clipped neatly. Daniel was repairing a fence line when she pulled up. He didn't stop working. She stepped out. "Fuel's full," she said, tossing him the receipt. He caught it. "You didn't have to bring fencing. It was discounted in bulk." He studied the coil. "You checked pricing." "I checked 3 suppliers." He didn't like that. And he did. "What else?" he asked. She handed him a folder. "I spoke to Whitaker at the bank." Daniel's hammer paused midair. "You did what?" "I didn't sign anything," she said immediately. "But we need to restructure before the balloon hits." He straightened slowly. "I know when it hits. I know you know." That landed differently. Not condescending. Acknowledging. "They'll extend if we present a 2-year operational plan," she said. He stared at her. 2 years, he repeated. Avery met his eyes. "We now legally have that." The air between them shifted. Daniel took the folder. "Read it carefully. Not skimming. Calculating." "It could work," he said quietly. Not praise, but not dismissal either. Pressure didn't disappear because they had paperwork. A water line split 3 days later in the east pasture. Cold air, mud, metal wrench biting into rusted fittings. Daniel crouched, jaw tight, hands steady. Avery stood opposite him, sleeves pushed up. "Hold it here," he said. She did. When the pipe jerked under pressure, she adjusted instinctively. "Don't lock your elbows," he said. She shifted her stance. The clamp snapped tight. Water steadied. They both exhaled. "The whole line's brittle," Daniel muttered. "How much to replace?" she asked. "More than we've got liquid." She didn't argue. She nodded once. "Then we patch strategically." He glanced at her. She didn't look away. That night, something small happened. Avery tried to split firewood. She swung once. The axe glanced off. Daniel leaned against the porch post watching. "City training?" he asked dryly. She shot him a look. Swung again. Missed again. He stepped forward. "Grip's wrong." She didn't hand it over. "Show me." He stepped behind her, adjusted her hands, moved her shoulders back 1/2 inch. "Use your weight." She did. The wood split cleanly. The sound echoed across the yard. She looked up at him. He didn't smile, but his eyes warmed. "Better," he said. She swung again, and this time it split without correction. Small success. Small shift. Later that week, after a meeting that bought them 8 weeks of feed stability, they came home lighter in their shoulders. Avery turned on the old radio while clearing papers from the kitchen table. Static, then music. She laughed once in surprise. "It still works." "Barely," Daniel said. She reached for his hand. "Come on." He hesitated. Then he took it. They moved awkwardly at first, boots scraping linoleum, laughter breaking through exhaustion. The song ended. Another began. Slower. Neither stepped apart. Daniel pulled her closer. She slid her fingers through his beard, feeling its rough warmth. He inhaled softly. She rested her head against his chest. His hand tightened at her back. For one suspended moment, neither of them pretended this was accidental. Then he stiffened. Not harsh. Deliberate. He stepped back 1/2 inch. "Good night, Avery," he said. Controlled. She stood there, heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. He walked out. The kitchen felt larger and emptier than before. Morning was awkward. They both pretended nothing had shifted. Hands brushed at the coffee rack. Both pulled back too quickly. Ledger on the table, he said. I saw. Neutral. Overcorrected. He grabbed his jacket. I'll check the north fence. Okay. He paused. Almost spoke. Didn't. The door shut behind him. The house exhaled. Avery stood still for a long moment, then reached for her phone and stepped out onto the back porch where service occasionally flickered to life near the fence line. 1 bar. She dialed anyway. Barbara answered on the second ring. Well, Barbara said immediately. Avery leaned against the porch railing and stared out at the pasture. It was just dancing. And he pulled me in. Barbara was quiet. And he pulled back. How? Careful, Avery said. Not rejection. Not anger. Controlled. Barbara exhaled softly. Did you want him to? Avery didn't answer right away. The wind moved through dry grass. I don't have time for this, she said finally. That wasn't my question. Avery pressed her lips together. He's honorable, she said. Barbara smiled on the other end. Avery could hear it. You sound almost annoyed about that. I'm not used to it, Avery said quietly. Men in my world don't pull back. No, Barbara said gently. They push. Silence lingered. Then Barbara's voice shifted, more thoughtful. You remember when Leela moved to town? Avery stared straight ahead. Yes. They dated 3 years. I know. And even then, Barbara continued carefully, he never looked at her the way he looks at you. Avery's jaw tightened. That's vague. It's not, Barbara said. It's attention. When you walk into a room, he registers it. When you speak, he listens differently. Leela was comfortable. You're not comfortable. That's not flattering. It is if you understand it, Barbara replied. Comfort is easy. What he feels for you has never been easy. Avery closed her eyes briefly. He hasn't said anything. He doesn't have to, Barbara said. He never looked at Leela like that, not once. The wind shifted across the field. Avery swallowed. It means it's real, she said quietly. There it was. Not dramatic. Just honest. Barbara softened. And that scares you more than a bad deal ever did. Avery straightened. I'm not scared. Barbara laughed gently. You don't have to say it out loud. The signal flickered. I need to get back, Avery said. To what? The ranch, she replied. And this time, the word didn't feel temporary. The call dropped. Avery lowered the phone slowly. She stood there for another moment, then squared her shoulders and walked back inside. Compartmentalize. Move. Work. But Barbara's words stayed with her longer than she wanted them to. He never looked at Leela like that. And Avery knew exactly what that meant. Winter settled over the ranch in a way the city never understood. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just quiet persistence. Cold mornings, frozen troughs, breath visible in the air before sunrise. Avery learned quickly that ranch work didn't wait for comfort, or mood, or lawyers. She stood in the barn aisle one morning with a clipboard tucked under her arm, scanning feed usage, while Daniel finished securing a stall gate. You're tracking consumption daily, he asked. Yes. Why? So nothing surprises us. He wiped his hands on a rag. Ranches run on instinct. Businesses run on numbers. He considered that. Neither was entirely wrong. They began moving around each other more easily now. Not close, but no longer strangers forced into proximity. Shared work had a rhythm. Fence posts measured without discussion. Tools passed without asking. Coffee poured automatically into 2 mugs. Trouble arrived without announcement. The first calf was born during a bitter overnight drop in temperature. Daniel noticed it before dawn. The heifer stood restless, sides tightening, breath puffing hard in the cold. "Avery," he called from the doorway. She was already pulling on boots. "Coming." The barn lights flicked on, soft yellow against frost. The labor stretched longer than expected. Daniel crouched beside the animal, calm but focused. "Heads turned," he muttered. Avery knelt opposite him without hesitation. "Tell me what you need." He glanced at her briefly. "Not testing. Deciding. Hold the lantern lower." She did. Minutes passed. Slow. Careful. Then the calf slipped free onto the straw. Wet, shivering, alive. Daniel exhaled. Avery laughed once under her breath. Relief. Small. Earned. She rubbed the calf dry with a feed towel. "You've done this before," Daniel observed. "Not exactly," she said, "but biology isn't complicated." He gave her a look that suggested ranch biology occasionally disagreed. Still, the calf stood within minutes. Strong legs. Good lungs. A good sign. They stepped outside afterward. Dawn barely touching the horizon. Frost covering the pasture like powdered glass. Avery leaned against the fence rail. "That's the first thing today that actually felt right." Daniel rested his arms beside hers. "This place does that." No pressure in the words. Just fact. Later that week, the bank meeting arrived. Whitaker's office smelled faintly of dust and old paperwork. Daniel hated banks. Avery didn't. She spread the ranch projections across the desk with quiet confidence. "Your operating margin improves if feed contracts stabilize," she explained. Whitaker adjusted his glasses. "And the labor. We already have it." Daniel looked sideways at her. She didn't look back. Whitaker tapped the numbers thoughtfully. "This assumes 2 full years of joint operation." "It's required," Avery replied. He nodded slowly. "I'll extend the note under those conditions." Daniel blinked once. "Just like that." Whitaker smiled faintly. "Not just like that, like this." He slid the paperwork forward. Avery reviewed every page. Not quickly, not casually, deliberately. When she finished, she passed the documents to Daniel. He read them just as carefully. Then signed. 2 signatures. 1 ranch. The weather changed 2 days after the bank meeting. Not dramatically. Just a slow darkening of the sky that never quite lifted. Wind moved low across the pastures, flattening the brittle winter grass and pushing thin sheets of dust along the ranch road. Daniel noticed it first. He stood at the edge of the equipment shed, watching the horizon. Avery stepped out beside him, holding a folder of feed invoices. "You look like the sky offended you," she said. "Storm's building." She followed his gaze west. Clouds stacked in long gray bands across the mountains. "Snow. Maybe." He paused. "Or wind." That seemed worse. Wind could tear through fences faster than snow ever could. Avery closed the folder. "What needs to be done?" Daniel ran a hand along the back of his neck, thinking. "Check the south pasture gates." "And the water lines," she added. He nodded once. "Exactly." They moved without another word. The ranch had begun teaching Avery something important. Most problems were solved before they started. The south pasture sat exposed along the ridge. Wind always hit there first. They drove the old truck halfway up the rise before the road became too rough to continue. The air had sharpened noticeably. Avery stepped down from the cab and pulled her coat tighter. The gate hinges groaned faintly as Daniel tested them. "Loose," he said. Avery crouched beside the post, brushing packed dirt away from the base. "How long has this been like that?" "Since before winter, probably." "Why didn't you fix it?" Daniel glanced at her. "Because there are only so many hours in a day." "Fair." She stood and grabbed the wrench from the truck bed. Metal rang against metal as she tightened the bolts. Daniel watched for a moment before stepping forward to steady the post. Their shoulders nearly touched. Not quite. The wind picked up along the ridge, cold and dry. "You ever miss the city?" he asked. The question seemed casual, but it was. Avery tightened the final bolt before answering. "Sometimes." "What part?" "Efficiency." She stood and wiped her hands on her jeans. "In the city, if something breaks, you call someone. It gets fixed quickly." Daniel nodded slowly. "Out here, we are someone." "Exactly." He closed the gate and tested the latch. "Solid now." "Do you regret it?" he asked. "The ranch." "The 2 years." Avery leaned against the fence post, looking out across the pasture. The cattle moved slowly in the distance. "I haven't decided yet." Honest. Daniel respected that. By the time they finished checking the south line, the wind had strengthened enough to whistle through the wire. Dust lifted from the road in thin, twisting spirals. Avery pulled her hat lower over her ears. "You were right about the storm," she said. Daniel didn't look particularly pleased about it. They climbed back into the truck. The engine turned over reluctantly before settling into its usual low rumble. As they drove back toward the house, the first flakes began falling. Not thick, just scattered white shapes drifting across the windshield. Avery watched them land and melt against the glass. Snow after all. Maybe. Daniel slowed the truck as they approached the barn. Or maybe the wind just pushed it ahead of something worse. They finished the remaining work quickly. Hay stacked. Doors secured. Water heaters checked. The ranch moved into its quiet evening posture. By the time they stepped into the house, the snow had thickened outside. The windows blurred with white. Avery dropped her gloves on the kitchen table. Her fingers tingled painfully as warmth returned. Daniel set 2 mugs on the counter. Coffee again. The habit had become automatic. She leaned against the sink while the kettle heated. "You know what the strangest part of this is?" she said. "What?" Avery gestured vaguely toward the window. "All of this. The ranch. The pace." She took the mug he handed her. In the city, every hour felt like it mattered. Daniel sat at the table. "And here." She thought about it. "Here the hours matter. A small distinction, but a real one." Daniel took a sip of coffee. Outside, wind pushed snow against the barn roof in long, sweeping lines. "You're starting to sound like someone who might stay." Avery raised an eyebrow. "Careful." "Why?" 2 years, she reminded him. He nodded. 2 years. The wind rattled the kitchen window softly. Neither of them spoke again for a while. Something shifted after that. Not romantic. Not yet. But steadier. Workdays stretched long. Cold evenings ended with quiet dinners in the kitchen. Avery discovered the pantry still held her grandmother's cast iron skillet. Daniel discovered Avery could cook something besides city salads. One night she burned the cornbread. Daniel ate it anyway. "You don't have to pretend," she said. "I'm not," he replied. "You are." He shrugged. "I've eaten worse." She laughed despite herself. That night snow began falling. Thick, quiet. By morning, the ranch was buried in white. Daniel stepped onto the porch and stopped. "Avery." She joined him. "What?" He pointed. The north fence had collapsed under drifting snow. Cattle tracks scattered toward the open pasture. "Great," she muttered. They worked for hours in knee-deep drifts, pushing the herd back and rebuilding the line. Cold bit through gloves. Wind burned their faces. At one point, Avery slipped hard against the frozen ground. Daniel hauled her up immediately. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." She glanced at her scraped palm. "Minor." He wrapped it with a strip of cloth from his pocket. "You don't stop moving in this weather," he said. "Understood." They finished the repair near sunset. Exhausted, freezing, but successful. Back at the house, Avery peeled off her wet coat and dropped into a kitchen chair. "I have never been this tired in my entire life." Daniel poured 2 glasses of water. "Ranch life." She drank half of it immediately. "Remind me why I agreed to 2 years of this." He studied her quietly. "Because you don't quit." The answer landed differently than praise. More like recognition. She looked at him across the kitchen table. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, the ranch felt warmer than it had in years. Neither of them said it, but both of them felt it. The kitchen was quiet in the way country houses often were at night. Not silent, never silent. The refrigerator hummed softly. Wind moved somewhere along the siding. A loose screen ticked now and then as it shifted in the frame. Avery stood at the counter with her hands wrapped around a mug that had long since stopped steaming. The light over the sink cast a soft amber pool across the worn wood, leaving the rest of the room in gentle shadow. Daniel leaned against the doorway. He had been there a while. Neither of them seemed in a hurry to move. "You're up late," he said. "So are you." A small corner of his mouth lifted. "Fair." She glanced toward him, then back down at the mug. "You ever notice how quiet it gets out here?" she said. Daniel shrugged slightly. "Always been quiet." "No," she said softly, "not like this." He pushed off the doorway and stepped into the room. The floor creaked once under his weight, the sound familiar, almost companionable. He stopped across from her at the counter, close enough that the lamplight caught the edge of his jaw. "You still getting used to it?" he asked. Avery looked up. Their eyes met. Something unspoken moved between them, something that had been building in small moments for weeks. Long drives, shared work, silence that didn't feel empty. "I don't think that's it," she said. "No. No." He studied her face, searching in the quiet way he always did, like he wasn't interested in easy answers. Then he stepped closer. Not abruptly, just enough that the distance between them changed. Avery didn't move. Her breath caught slightly, the way it does when you realize a moment is shifting into something else. "You remember," Daniel said slowly, "when you left the first time?" She blinked. "Daniel." "I'm just saying," he continued, voice softer now. "I used to think about it, what it would have been like if you'd stayed." The words hung there. Avery's fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "Daniel." He shook his head once, almost like he was arguing with himself. "I mean, it's not like it mattered," he said, though his voice carried the quiet weight of someone who knew it had mattered very much. You had your life, your plans. His eyes lifted to hers again. But the answering machine clicked on. The sudden mechanical whir of the tape engaging broke the room like a snapped thread. Both of them froze. The machine sat on the small side table near the wall, beige plastic, slightly yellowed with age, the kind Avery's grandfather refused to replace no matter how many newer phones existed. A red light blinked. Then the recorded voice began. "Avery, it's Harper." The message crackled faintly through the small speaker. "I just got confirmation from the board this evening." Daniel's gaze moved slowly toward the machine. Avery didn't move at all. "I know you've been out of town dealing with family things," Harper continued, "but I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else." A short pause. Then, "Congratulations. The partnership vote passed unanimously." Avery closed her eyes for a moment. "I'll expect to see you back in the office Monday so we can finalize everything." The tape clicked. Silence returned. Daniel stood very still. Avery finally set the mug down. "I forgot about that," she said quietly. Daniel let out a slow breath through his nose. "Did you?" It wasn't loud, but something in his tone had changed. "Daniel, you always were good at that," he said, not looking at her now, "making it sound temporary." "That's not fair." He turned then. His expression wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was resigned. "You were always going to leave," he said. Avery's head shook immediately. "That's not." "You had the city before you even finished high school," he continued calmly. "Everyone knew it." "That doesn't mean." "It means this was always just a stop on the way back." The words landed harder because he wasn't raising his voice, because he sounded like someone stating a fact he'd already accepted. Avery stepped toward him. "Daniel, listen to me." But he was already moving. Not fast, just enough to create space between them again. He reached the doorway and paused there. For a moment, it looked like he might say something else. Instead, he gave a small nod toward the answering machine. "Congratulations, Avery." Then he turned off the kitchen light as he walked out. The house fell into darkness again, except for the small blinking red light on the answering machine. Still recording. Still waiting. Avery stood alone in the kitchen. The blinking red light from the answering machine pulsed quietly in the darkness. After a moment, she reached for her keys. The night outside was cool. Avery stepped off the porch and walked toward her car. The ranch was nearly black at night. No streetlights, no passing cars, just the wide stretch of land and the sky above it. She opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. For a moment, she just sat there, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. The house behind her remained quiet. No footsteps, no door opening, no voice calling her back. Avery stared through the windshield at the dark ribbon of road leading away from the ranch. The city waited at the other end of that road. The office, the partnership, the life she had spent years building. She turned the key. The engine came to life with a low, steady rumble that sounded louder in the stillness than it actually was. Headlights swept across the yard, the barn, the fence line. Then she turned back to the road. The tires rolled slowly across the gravel driveway before reaching the dirt lane beyond the gate. Dust rose behind the car as it gathered speed, the headlights carving a pale path through the night. The ranch fell away behind her. Fields gave way to long, empty highway. The sky stretched wide and black above it. Avery drove toward the city without looking back. She arrived before sunrise. The city looked different that early. Quiet, muted. The glass towers that usually reflected blinding daylight instead held pale gray morning clouds. Avery parked near her apartment and walked inside. The hallway smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and stale air conditioning. Inside the apartment, she dropped her keys on the counter. The place looked exactly as she had left it. Clean, orderly, carefully arranged. She walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. Hot water filled the small room with steam. Avery stood under it for a long time. When she stepped out, she wrapped a towel around her hair and moved to the sink. The mirror had fogged completely. She wiped it with her hand. Her reflection appeared slowly through the clearing glass. Avery looked at herself for a moment. Then she lowered her hand and stepped away. The office lobby was already awake by the time she arrived. Coffee cups, elevator doors sliding open and closed. Quiet conversations beginning the day. Avery stepped into the elevator and rode up to her floor. Harper was waiting outside his office. He smiled when he saw her. There she is. Avery returned a small nod. He handed her a slim folder. "Your partnership documents," he said. Then he reached into his pocket and handed her a small black key fob. "Building access," he added, "perk of the job." Avery took both. Harper leaned back slightly against his desk. "Funny timing," he said casually. "My divorce finalized yesterday." Avery said nothing. "Cost of doing business," he added with a shrug. She nodded once. Then she turned and walked down the hallway toward her office. The city stretched wide beyond the glass wall behind her desk. Traffic flowed in slow ribbons along the streets below. People hurried along sidewalks. Meetings, deadlines, 70-hour work weeks, client dinners that stretched late into the night, apartments that stayed quiet when the day ended. Avery stood there looking out at it. Then she looked down at the folder in her hands. Her grandfather's pen rested inside her bag. She took it out and turned it once between her fingers. For a moment, she imagined the years ahead. The promotions, the long hours, the polished offices, maybe someone beside her someday. Another professional living the same life. Schedules that passed each other. Lights going off in separate rooms. Avery closed the folder. She opened a box from the cabinet beside her desk and began placing her things inside. The framed photo, the notebooks, her grandfather's pen. When the box was full, she picked up the folder and the key fob. Then she walked back down the hallway. Harper looked up as she entered. That was quick. Avery set the folder and the key fob on his desk. "I'm not taking it," she said. Harper blinked. "The partnership." She shook her head. "I resign." Silence hung in the office. Harper studied her carefully. "You're serious?" "Yes." He leaned back slowly. "Well," he said after a moment, "that's a first." Avery gave a small nod. Then she picked up her box and walked out. The drive back felt shorter. The city fell away behind her. The highway opened into fields again. Wind moved across the grass in slow waves. By the time the Caldwell Ranch sign appeared ahead of her, the sun had begun to lower toward evening. She drove through the gate. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. The ranch house stood where it always had. Quiet, steady, unchanged. Avery parked the car and stepped out. She walked to the porch. Her key was in her pocket. She didn't use it. Instead, she knocked. Footsteps moved inside. The door opened. Daniel stood there. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I drove to the city," she said. Daniel nodded once. "I figured. I went to the office." His jaw tightened slightly. Okay. They gave me the partnership folder, she continued, and a key fob. Daniel didn't say anything. I gave them back. Silence settled between them. You what? I resigned. Daniel stared at her. You worked 10 years for that. Yes. And you just walked away. Yes. He searched her face. Why? Avery stepped closer. I want this life. She gestured toward the land beyond the house. I want this ranch. Then she looked directly at him. And I want you. The wind moved softly across the pasture. Daniel stood very still. Then he stepped out onto the porch, closing the distance between them. Avery, he said quietly, you don't have to do that. Yes, she said. I mean it. So do I. He studied her face one more time. You're sure? Completely. Then, almost like the answer had been waiting years to arrive, he reached for her and pulled her into his arms. Avery pulled back just enough to look at him. You're really here, he said quietly. Yes. And you're staying. Yes. Her hand rose to the back of his neck as she stepped closer. Their kiss was slow at first, almost cautious. Two people who had waited years for a moment neither of them had ever been certain would come. Then the hesitation faded. Daniel's hand moved to the small of her back, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. No answering machine. No interruptions. Just the quiet porch, the fading light, and the wide open ranch around them. Somewhere beyond the fence line, wind moved softly through the grass. And this time, neither of them pulled away.